Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. You're listening to the Everglade Chronicles a reading. I'm Garrett Shave, the author. This week we finish off the supermassive Chapter 4. Finally, Theo gets to mingle with the royals. But is the price of curiosity worth the prize? Let's find out. On Wednesday afternoon there was a light drizzle. I decided to make for my lordship and visit the misty meadow. It was still nice out, but overcast and rainy. Luckily, I had my yellow umbrella. As I walked along the birch trail, I met a curious figure. She was dignified with a thin body. She wore jeans and a dark red leather jacket with burgundy hair dangling past her shoulders. I could not help but notice her silvery eyes. She carried with her a small black backpack and a modern, transparent umbrella. She stared at me, this curious girl. I stared back, unable to look away. In a way, she looked familiar, but she was much too old to be part of the meadow game. "Theodore Walker, I presume?" she asked, her voice melodious. I nodded, halting in my tracks. "How did you know my name?" She smirked. "You look too much like your cousin, silly boy." In an instant I knew it had to be Cora Hastings, the ousted Lady Spymaster. "And you are—" "Cora Hastings, Lady Spymaster." "What are you doing here?" I inquired. "Sometimes I come here. I am, after all, in charge of whispers and such. I might not have a master, but I am still a spy." We began to walk together, snaking our way through the birches and stepping near the Bermuda Bridge. "I have been watching the meadow from afar, and I have been watching you. There are so few of us left from the old regime," she said as we crossed the bridge. "Mark is back in the Lost Forest. Madison is the Duchess of Sunset, and here I am, an outcast. I can no longer return." "Certainly you can." She laughed. "The old spy master? Hardly, my young friend. The spy agency that Sassy Cassie crafted is now defunct, totally destroyed. This Dragon Emperor is ruthless. He infiltrated my lair, killed all my spies, and I barely escaped with my life. I am too old for this game anyway. I should have just entered the portal with Isis and Ben." "That is why most people leave, isn't it?" I asked. "Because they lose their imagination?" She nodded. "That's it, kid. Your cousin knew when to move on. Some of us had to stick around." "Jessica is still very imaginative, but I suppose she has other priorities. I think there must be a message from above or something, an indication it's time to leave the meadow. I never got that, not in the way that the others have." She coughed and looked away from me. "I didn't think it was possible that a timid royal attendant could rise up and overthrow a queen, but I suppose anything is possible." "The meadow is now a web of secrecy," I told her sadly. "We rounded past the royal city. Despite being a lord myself, I have asked so many questions, but have received so few answers. The Dragon Emperor is portraying himself as a deity, an unstoppable force." "Do you know who this kid is?" she asked. "I sure don't." "I do not know either," I answered. "There are many that know, but none who wish to reveal it. I was once told that the Elite Four have an oath to keep his identity safe on penalty of death." Cora stopped and thought for a moment. The rain had stopped, but she kept her umbrella open. She stared up at the clearing sky. "Look, kid, you should probably stop asking so many questions for the time being. The Elite Four are not afraid to operate as secret police. You could face some serious jail time for being a pest. Curious people form their own opinions and often have to be eliminated." "I will persist in my pursuit of knowledge, Cora," I remarked proudly, adjusting my glasses. "I cannot be shut up forever. A true, just society should have free thought." She smiled, so much like Jessica. These totalitarian governments love to shut up curiosity. Curiosity is the opposite of oppression. One cannot be curious if they are oppressed. Oppression does not permit curiosity. What does curiosity bring? It brings new ideas, and the powers that be hate new thoughts. If new ideas arrive, dear Theo, the Dragon Emperor's unstoppable facade will be stoppable." I nodded. It was simple. The dragon was keeping us all down, unable to be free. Only his rules and his laws made sense, and they had to be obeyed with ruthless force. Anyway, the rain is clearing up, which means kids will be coming through the meadow soon. I cannot have myself seen. I am going to see Prince Oberon. See you later." I nodded, and I watched her jog away. She closed her umbrella, and before long she was gone. I figured the person I could talk to the most was Prince Oberon, Mark Glass, in my pursuit of knowledge. Certainly he would have the most vivid memory of anyone in the meadow, as well as a display of its rich history. Like before, it was not hard for me to enter the forest once they knew who I was. All I had to do was reveal my green pendant the prince had given me. I came upon the capital, and while I was given some odd glares, I found the prince's circular compound with ease. Cora Hastings was nowhere to be found, but the learned prince was standing on top of the slide. He looked normal today, wearing a simple plaid shirt and jeans. He wore no princely regalia, no crown and no robe. He looked just like a regular boy. "Young Lord Theo," he said, sliding down, "what brings you to Gaia on this day?" I noticed that the heavenly Princess Violet was nowhere to be seen either. "I was hoping you could help me with something, Your Highness," I said simply. I explained to him about my quest for information and my desire for answers. He seemed intrigued that I was so curious. Mark revealed to me that he was a storyteller, a keeper of history. I smiled. He informed me that the storytellers were an ancient order of scholarly children whose mission was to preserve the history of Everglade. There had existed many dynasties and timelines in the meadow. We were but a few players in a timeline further down. "I suppose I should start with King Thomas, the lad who preceded Queen Venus," the prince explained. He gestured for us to sit on the edge of the circular gymnasium. Children were playing all around us, but they kept quiet while their prince spoke. "Thomas was a kind and gentle ruler. You might ask, then, why was he overthrown? Simple, really. Venus was hungry for power. She rallied everyone to her cause, spreading lies and deceit about Thomas. Ironically, Thomas and Caitlin had their final battle at Queen's Summit, and Thomas was sent rolling down the hill. How dreadful. It must have been terrible to lose such a powerful king," I murmured. "It was. Thomas had come from a long line of real-life family members who had been kings of Everglade," he replied. "In the beginning, the children were drunk on Caitlin's victory. We were ecstatic and pleased that we had won. I knew what she had done was wrong, and I stood with Gabrielle. She then used her newfound position as an avenue for totalitarian deceit and absolute power. Of course, I know the story of how Queen Venus was overthrown by my very own cousin Isis. I know all those tales because the children around here have them memorized. They are recent memories." Prince Oberon nodded. "Yes, that's very true. I am sure the Dragon Emperor is working tirelessly to erase those memories, for rebellion must hang deep in the air. Queen Isis was revered. I've heard rumors that he is attempting to censor the past. He wants to make us believe that such events never happened. What about the Lost Forest?" Mark smiled and looked around at the trees. They seemed to be speaking to him. "The Lost Forest has always been a separate entity, even though it was part of the kingdom. We kept to our own affairs, and I was taken under the wing of our greatest duchess, Gabrielle Sinclair. She's the longest reigning ruler in our history. Did you know that?" He smiled, but then his smile wavered. "When Gabrielle became the duchess, I was her protege. I am a forest denizen through and through. Everyone here supported me, everyone but Queen Venus. When Gabrielle left, she installed her own pawn, Tyler Crest, who was an awful ruler. Eventually he failed her expectations, and he was overthrown in a great battle and given a restart. He later joined our Liberation Army. Then that pompous Lord Ashton came along and ruined everything further, right?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes, you do know some of the story. I became the Duke after that, when Isis came to the throne. I ruled for a little while. As time passed, my priorities in life changed. I could feel my energy weakening from this place, and each time I came here it became more of a chore. Just before Isis decided to leave, I designated the best person I could as my heir. He was a cunning young forest lad named Arrowhead. Well, his real name was Joshua Cardinal. Where is he now?" "Gone, like the rest of them," Mark sighed. I could tell he was becoming emotional. "What happened?" He inhaled sharply, staring up at the sky as to hide his welling tears. "The Dragon Emperor." I swallowed hard. "Of course. I will tell you. Prepare yourself. Arrowhead was a great kid. He was spunky and energetic, a real forest prodigy. I could sense his ability to speak with the trees. This is an age-old power that occurs naturally in those that live in the lost forest. It is a rare gift now, and when its power is detected, it usually is a signifier of greatness. I left the meadow shortly after Jessica and Ben, but it seemed the tiger was just waiting to pounce. It was not long after we had left that the Dragon Emperor launched his assault. Arrowhead was successful in repelling most of their attacks, but he could not keep them all at bay. After what seemed like ages of fighting, the lost forest fell, and Arrowhead was banished. Not executed, I pondered? Was it not typical to execute your enemies? Mark shook his head. No, he was banished. The Dragon Emperor challenged him to a sword battle match for his life. Being the cunning forest talent that he was, Arrowhead easily defeated the Emperor in the match. He walked away with a simple banishment. Once I found out that he had been exiled, I knew the children needed me again. Now the rest is history. Wow, what a great story. I wish I knew someone like Arrowhead. He sounded pretty cool. He was. He ended up moving away just before I returned to the meadow, so we could not fight together. I looked at my shoes for a moment. Do you know who the Dragon Emperor is? I do not, young one, the prince replied sorrowfully. I have seen him a great deal of times, mostly because he was after my princess, but other than that I have no idea who he really is. I have only seen his glimmering blue eyes. They haunt me. His limited presence is familiar, however. Before I could stammer an answer, children approached us. It was Princess Violet, her hands tented at center once more, her lavish blonde hair in curls. She was with another girl I did not know, who was wearing a rather interesting jacket. It was all cut up in dark purple, kind of grungy looking. Her hair was a short-cut black bob and streaked with electric purple. Her eyes were vibrant chestnut brown and animated. She looked to be closer in age to Mark than me. I would have placed her at around 14 years old. Lord Theo, how nice to see you again, the princess remarked. Her tone and opinion of me seemed to have changed. I rose to bow before her. Mark rose from his seat as well and dusted off his jeans. Lord Theo and I were discussing history. How marvelous, the princess was bored already. Lord Theo, this is Ambassador Tremblay. She is our emissary to your capital. Nice to meet you, Ambassador, I said. The girl bowed before me. What a pleasure it is to meet you, my lord. Please call me Annie. I was startled for a moment at her thick French accent. Mark and Violet smirked and giggled. Pardon my accent, my lord, Annie said suddenly. I am from a very rich French part of Quebec, you see. I have only just moved here. Your accent does not bother me in the slightest. Just a simple surprise, I said. I do like your hair. Thank you, my lord, she beamed. Have I answered all of your questions, Lord Theo? Mark asked me. I nodded. Yes, for the time being. I thank you for it. You have really added a new perspective to my understanding of the meadow. That reminds me, Princess Violet said suddenly. She brought one finger to her mouth. One of the Elite Four is meeting us at the Big Maple in a few minutes. I came here to gather you, my prince. What is going on, then? Prince Oberon asked. The handoff. Violet was angered that he had forgotten. The ambassador is to be sent to the capital, remember? That is the reason Annie is here with me. I am most excited, Annie smiled. My mistake, princess, Mark smiled roughly. Yes, off to the Big Maple, then. Lord Theo, would you like to come with us? Certainly it is not my place, I said quietly. You might as well come, Violet said sharply. We are already late. The big maple was, well, a big maple tree. As far as I knew, it was the only maple tree in the entire meadow. While it was still early May, its blooms were not vibrant and red just yet. It was situated on the outskirts of Gaia and set atop a small incline very close to the gravel path that led around the meadow. The princess brought along her guards, who stood with us to make sure nothing bad could happen. They looked like chess knights. Diplomacy right now is very fragile between your empire and Gaia, Prince Oberon explained as we waited. We have our guards, and they will too. Ambassador Annie here is going to try her best to represent our greatest interests at your emperor's court. I will do my best, your royal highnesses, she smiled. Annie was full of energy. While we have maintained diplomacy, it has been noted that relations between our two nations is abysmal, to say the least, Violet huffed. As I have stated before, we have no desire to return to the Empire. I do not blame you, I remarked. From across the fields we could finally see an arriving ensemble. It was a group of 6, and heavily armed too. 3 samurai marched in front, with their katana extended upwards, followed by a single Elite Four member. A random herald was dancing in front, waving a long red pennon. 2 samurai held the rear, but their swords were in their hilts. The samurai in the middle marching was none other than Crane. His armor was shiny blue plastic. He wore a blue ribbon tied around his forehead, and the rest dangling in the wind. He had a long nose and short, cut brown hair. Crane was not very tall, and was about average height with his men. His eyes were a dark green. You would not be able to pick him out from a crowd save for his shiny blue uniform. Our own group marched down to the meeting place right in front of the big maple. Princess Violet clasped her hands as Prince Oberon stood forward. "Afternoon, Your Highness," Crane called from behind his ranks. He signaled for his guards to move aside. Wearing a smug look, he approached Oberon. The herald was enthusiastically waving the pennon around in the air, almost like he was ribbon dancing. I envied his aloofness. He was not bothered by the tension here. "Yes, a fine one it is, Crane," Mark replied. "Allow me to introduce our newest ambassador, Annie Tremblay." "Well met," Annie said, bowing before the Elite Four. She was grinning brightly. The sworn blade was not impressed. "You do not have to impress me, young lady. I am but a humble servant of the Exalted One." Annie nodded, and her happy demeanor sank like an old warship. I was quite certain that she had been briefed about the protocol of the Elite Four. They were an inquisitive foursome, with high morals and battle skills. Their only allegiance was to their emperor, and they were not members of the gentry or the aristocracy. They were in the middle. "We will take her back to Emperor's Perch," Crane began. "It is my emperor's desire that you do not have any contact with her inside of our empire. She must go to you." "Gaia accepts those conditions," Prince Oberon said. "We have no desire to visit your lands." "In closing, the Emperor would like to know if you and your consort will be attending the season opening this Friday evening." Oberon nodded and looked back at Violet. She paused before nodding in agreement. "Brilliant! I shall tell my master," Crane remarked with a neutral tone. He looked over at me briefly and gave me an abnormal stare. "Are you Lord Theo of Cloverleaf?" Busted. I froze, unable to speak. What was the consequence of talking with the Gaia Royals? Would I be arrested? Would I be banned from the Meadow game? "Yes," Oberon interjected. "His cousin is a close friend of mine, and we were just touching base about her, actually. I trust there is no issue?" "He should not be in Gaia," Crane said coldly. "He is a lord from our lands, not yours." He then turned to me. "How did you enter Gaia without express permission from the Emperor?" "I gave him permission," Mark said fiercely. "Now leave it at that, or we will have a diplomatic problem. Do you hear me?" Crane was shocked at the level of fierceness that Prince Oberon displayed, but he kept his composure and simply nodded. I could see he had recoiled a bit. "You are an interesting kid, Lord Theo," he said, as his small band of guards turned around. "What is that supposed to mean?" I asked, frightened. "It means they know all about you, and what you've been doing," Violet remarked dully. I could feel myself becoming uncomfortable, endless scenarios running through my brain. I did not feel Mark approach me as the others walked away. "Be strong, young Theo," he mumbled like an old sage. "It is always the darkest before the dawn. Things will be all right. Simply know you have an ally in Gaia." I stared up at him, my eyes worrisome and teary. "Thank you, Your Highness." That concludes Part 2 of Chapter 4. What will Theo face in the coming pages? Join me when I read Chapter 5, the season opener, next week. Take care for now. Dragon Boats by Fass is the music used during this novel on the podcast. Find us online on Facebook and Instagram by searching @Everglade Chronicles. You can find all 3 of the Everglade Chronicles novels exclusively on Amazon. Thank you kindly for your support.